The fire crackled low in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the weathered walls of the cabin. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled through the pines, but inside the air hung thick with memory and smoke. Elijah Coltrane sat in his chair, 90 years weighing heavy on his shoulders, his gnarled hands resting on knees that had carried him through more miles than most men could imagine. Across from him, his grandson Daniel perched on a wooden stool, 12 years old and hungry for stories the way only boys that age can be. Daniel had been asking questions all evening. Questions about the old days, about the mountains, about why his grandfather lived alone in this cabin so far from town. Questions about the photograph on the mantel, the one showing a woman with kind eyes and a determined jaw, standing beside a younger version of Eli, both of them squinting into sunlight that seemed to come from another lifetime entirely. "Grandpa," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the quiet, "why don't you go to church like Grandma used to, before she passed, I mean?" Eli didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, watching them consume the dry wood the same way time had consumed his youth, his strength, his certainty about most things in this world. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rough, like stones grinding together after years of silence. "Let me tell you about a woman," he said. "The bravest woman I ever knew. Her name was Clara Doyle." Daniel leaned forward, sensing the weight behind the words. "When I found her," Eli continued, his eyes still fixed on the fire, "she was hanging from a tree, dying slowly, and she was begging, not for rescue, for death." The old man paused, letting that image settle in the boy's mind. Then he closed his eyes, and the cabin seemed to fall away, replaced by the sharp scent of pine and the taste of mountain air, cold and clean. The year was 1879, and Elijah Coltrane was 47 years old, with a full head of dark hair streaked with premature gray, a beard that hung down to his chest, and eyes that had seen too much death to trust in much of anything anymore. He lived alone then, as he did now, but in those days his solitude was absolute. His cabin sat high in the Absaroka Range, a full day's ride from the nearest town, accessible only by trails that disappeared under snow half the year. He preferred it that way. The world below, with its people and their endless capacity for cruelty, dressed up as civilization, held nothing for him anymore. Not since Rebecca died, not since Emma died, not since he learned that prayers don't stop plague and good intentions don't fill graves that should have stayed empty. September in the high country meant the aspen leaves were turning gold, the air sharp with the promise of winter coming down from the peaks. Eli spent his days checking trap lines, hunting elk and mule deer, curing meat and hides that he'd trade once or twice a year for the few supplies he couldn't make himself. He knew every ridge and valley for 20 miles in any direction. He knew where the grizzlies denned and where the mountain lions hunted. He knew the land so well that when something felt wrong, he knew it immediately, the way a man knows when someone is watching him, even though he can't see them yet. That afternoon, he was checking snares near Big Timber Creek, moving quiet through the undergrowth, the way he'd learned from years of hunting, and before that, from years of scouting for the Army during the Indian Wars. The traps were empty, which happens sometimes, but there was something else, a wrongness in the air. Birds too quiet, squirrels gone still, the forest holding its breath. Then he heard it, a voice, thin and desperate, barely louder than the wind through the pines. At first, he thought it was an animal caught in someone else's trap, maybe a coyote or a young bear. But then the sound shaped itself into words, and the words were human, and they were pleading. "Please," the voice said, so faint he almost missed it. "It's rubbing against it. I can't. God, please, I can't anymore." Eli's hand went to the rifle slung across his back, a Henry 44-40 that had never failed him. He moved toward the sound, each step placed careful, eyes scanning the trees. Could be a trick. Bandits sometimes used women as bait, knowing most men would come running without thinking. But as he drew closer, pushing through a stand of lodgepole pine, he saw that this was no trap. At least not the kind he'd imagined. There, hanging from a massive ponderosa that must have been standing when his grandfather was young, was a woman. She hung not by her neck, which would have killed her quick, but by rope wound tight around her waist and thighs, the kind of binding that would keep someone alive while maximizing their suffering. Her feet dangled inches above the ground, close enough that she must have spent hours trying to reach it, stretching until her muscles gave out. Her dress, once probably a respectable calico print, hung in tatters. Her hair, brown and tangled, fell across a face so pale it looked like marble. Her hands, bound behind her back, had gone purple from lack of blood. But it was her eyes that stopped Eli cold. They were open, staring at nothing, filmed over with the kind of pain that goes beyond physical. She'd been here long enough to move past terror into some gray country where hope dies and only endurance remains. For 3 heartbeats, Eli stood frozen. In his mind, he saw Rebecca dying in their bed, calling for him while he was 200 miles away. He saw Emma, 8 years old, her small body wrapped in a sheet because there was no one left to build her a coffin. He saw all the times he'd failed to be there, failed to act fast enough, failed to matter. Not again. He moved fast then, covering the distance in 4 strides. The woman flinched when she saw him, a jerk of pure animal fear, and tried to speak but only managed a broken sob. Eli didn't waste time with reassurances. He pulled his Bowie knife, 12 inches of steel, sharp enough to shave with, and cut the rope in one clean motion. She fell, and he caught her before she hit the ground, taking her weight against his chest. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, all bone and terror. She shook so hard her teeth chattered, despite the warm September sun filtering through the trees. Her breath came in short gasps, and when she tried to speak, the words tumbled out, broken and ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Eli looked down at her, the stranger convulsing in his arms, apologizing for her own torture, and something old and calcified in his chest shifted slightly. He shrugged out of his leather jacket, worn soft from years of use and smelling of smoke and pine pitch, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he positioned himself between her and the open forest, blocking her from view of anyone who might be watching, shielding her from whatever shame she felt exposed to. "Don't move," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "You're safe now." She looked up at him then, really looked, and he saw her try to process the word. Safe, as if it were a concept from another language, one she'd forgotten how to translate. Eli examined the rope marks, keeping his touch clinical, professional. He'd doctored enough wounded soldiers and animals to know what he was looking at. The rope had been tied deliberately wrong, positioned to chafe and burn without cutting deep enough to kill. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. Someone had wanted her to suffer. She flinched when his fingers brushed a particularly raw spot, and the pain flared sharp enough that she cried out, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as him. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The rope, it hurt me bad, worse than the burns." Eli's jaw tightened, not with desire but with anger, with restraint, with something old and dangerous that he'd spent 11 years trying to bury in these mountains. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone had tied that rope to humiliate, to punish, to break her, and whoever had done it wasn't far. The tracks were fresh, boot prints from 3 men, hoof prints from 2 horses. They'd left her here to die slow, checking back periodically to see if she'd given them what they wanted yet. In the distance, dust drifted up from the road that led back to Leadville, that rough mining town 30 miles south where civilization, such as it was, clung to the edge of the wilderness. Somewhere down there, the man who put her on this tree was still breathing free air, probably sitting in a saloon, probably smiling. Eli wrapped the jacket tighter around the woman's shoulders and stood. His decision made without conscious thought, the way all his best decisions had always been made. The town would talk. The town would twist this into something ugly. The town would shock itself with lies and rumors. But none of that mattered more than the simple fact that this woman would die if he left her here. And she'd probably die if he took her into town right now, killed by gossip and shame if not by the men who'd put her on that tree. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, though he could see the lie in it. She could barely sit up. "Good enough," he said. He whistled sharp, and his horse, a tough Appaloosa stallion named Ghost for the white patches across his haunches, picked his way through the trees to where they stood. Eli lifted the woman as gently as he could, which wasn't very gentle given the circumstances, and settled her in front of the saddle. She gasped when the movement jarred her injuries, but bit down on the sound, trying to be brave, or maybe just trying not to burden him further. He swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady, and turned Ghost toward home. Not toward town, not toward whatever law might exist in Leadville. Toward his cabin, where he could at least keep her alive long enough to understand what had been done to her and who had done it. They rode slow through the afternoon light, Eli constantly scanning the trees, watching for movement, listening for the sound of men on horseback. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder. Once, she murmured something that might have been a name. Once, she murmured something incoherent, and he told her quiet but firm to save her strength. The cabin appeared through the trees like it always did, low and solid, built from whole logs notched tight, the roof covered in split shakes weighted down with stones. Smoke drifted from the chimney, the fire he'd left banked that morning, still glowing. He'd built this place with his own hands after Rebecca and Emma died, choosing the location for its remoteness and defensibility. A soldier's instinct never quite forgotten. He carried the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The cabin was one room, maybe 12 feet by 14, with a sleeping platform at one end, a stone fireplace at the other, and his few possessions arranged with military precision. Furs and hides covered the floor and hung from the walls for insulation. His rifle stood beside the door. His knife lay on the table. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of sage and yarrow and other plants whose names he'd learned from the crow woman who'd taught him which roots cured fever and which poultices stopped infection. He laid the woman on his bed, the only bed, a frame built from pine and strung with rope to support a mattress stuffed with dried grass and covered with a grisly hide he'd taken 3 years back. She curled on her side immediately, knees drawn up, still shaking. Eli grabbed a bucket, filled it with water from the barrel by the door, and set it on the fire to heat. Then he laid out his supplies: clean cloth torn from an old shirt, the leather pouch containing his medicine kit, a bottle of whiskey for sterilizing and for drinking if the pain got too bad. When the water was hot, he carried it to the bedside and knelt down, positioning himself at eye level with her, non-threatening as he could manage given that he was a large man with a scarred face and hands that looked like they'd done violence, which they had. "I'm going to clean these wounds," he said. "It's going to hurt, but it needs to be done." She nodded, her eyes closed, bracing herself. He worked as gently as his rough hands allowed, washing away dried blood and dirt, checking for signs of deep damage. The rope burns were bad, but not life-threatening if they didn't get infected. He'd seen worse in the war, men with flesh flayed off by grape shot or torn open by bayonets. This was deliberate cruelty, which was its own kind of terrible, but it was survivable. He mixed a poultice from bear grease and powdered yarrow, the same mixture he used on himself when he got cut or burned. It stank, a thick animal smell that probably didn't inspire confidence, but it worked. He'd learned that much from the crow. The old ways often worked better than anything you could buy in town, assuming town even had a real doctor, which Leadville probably didn't. "It still hurts," she whispered, her voice thin with exhaustion. "Down there, please." Eli paused, his hands hovering over the bandages. He understood what she was saying, understood the specific nature of the torture that had been inflicted. His jaw tightened again, but he kept his voice level. "It will be done," he said. "For a while, but it will heal. That's what bodies do if you give them time." Time, that word seemed to register with her. She let out a breath she'd been holding, maybe for hours, maybe for days. For the first time since he'd cut her down, no one was telling her to hurry. No one was telling her to be quiet. No one was telling her she deserved this. He finished bandaging her as best he could, then pulled a wool blanket over her and stepped back. She was asleep before he reached the door, exhaustion finally claiming her. Eli walked outside, needing air, needing distance from the intensity of another person's suffering in his space. The sun was setting, painting the peaks orange and red. He should have felt satisfaction at having saved a life. Instead, he felt the old weight settling back on his shoulders, the weight of responsibility for another human being, the weight of knowing that whoever had done this would come looking. He was still standing there, watching the light fade, when he heard horses. 2 riders moving slow up the trail, not trying to hide their approach. Eli's hand went to the Colt revolver on his hip, a single-action Army Model 45 that had been with him since the war. He didn't draw it, just rested his palm on the grip, a reminder that violence was an option if it needed to be. The riders stopped at the edge of the clearing, far enough back that Eli couldn't see their faces clearly in the gathering dusk. One of them called out, his voice carrying that false friendliness that men use when they're testing boundaries. "Evening there, friend. Everything all right?" Eli didn't answer right away. He studied them, reading their posture, their hands, their horses. Not locals, too well dressed for trappers or prospectors. Hired men, maybe. The kind who did work that required not asking questions. Fine, Eli said finally, his voice flat. Private property. Sure, the man said. We don't mean to intrude. Just looking for someone. A woman, young, probably confused, might have wandered up this way. Haven't seen anyone, Eli said. Just me and the mountains. The two men exchanged glances. The one who hadn't spoken yet leaned forward in his saddle, squinting toward the cabin. Eli shifted slightly, blocking the sight line to the door, making it look natural. You sure about that? The first man said. Because we got reason to believe she came this way. And if you're helping her, well, that's interfering with family business. Her brother-in-law is real worried about her. Brother-in-law. So that's how they were playing it. Concerned family looking for a troubled woman. Except concerned family didn't tie people to trees and leave them to die. I'm sure, Eli said. Now get off my land before I stop being polite. The threat hung in the air between them. For a moment, Eli thought they might push it, might force the situation into violence. His thumb eased back the hammer on the Colt, a tiny click that carried in the stillness. The riders heard it, understood it. All right then, the first man said, reining his horse around. But if you do see her, you tell her Wade Driscoll is looking for her. Tell her he just wants to talk. Work things out peaceful. They rode off, disappearing into the trees. Eli stood there until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then waited another 10 minutes in case they circled back. They didn't. Not yet. But they'd be back. Men like that always came back. He went inside, barred the door, and loaded his rifle. Then he sat in the chair by the fire, the chair he'd carved from a single piece of pine 3 years ago, when his hands needed something to do besides shake. The woman slept on, her breathing finally steady. In the firelight, with her face relaxed, she looked younger than he'd first thought. Mid-20s maybe, around the age Emma would have been if she'd lived. Eli closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He listened to the night sounds, the familiar creaks and groans of the cabin settling, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the pines. And underneath it all, the steady rhythm of the woman's breathing, proof that she was alive, that he'd gotten there in time, that for once in his God-forsaken life, he hadn't been too late. Morning came cold and gray, clouds moving in from the west promising rain or maybe early snow. Eli had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every hour or so to check that the woman was still breathing, still there though, still real. The night had a way of making things feel like dreams, and more than once he'd wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing, if he'd opened his eyes to find the cabin empty and himself alone again. But she was there, curled under the blanket, her face half hidden in the bearskin. She stirred as the light strengthened, a small movement at first, then a sharp intake of breath as consciousness brought back memory, and with memory, pain. Eli stood, joints protesting, and moved to the fireplace. He built up the flames and set water to boil, then sliced thin strips from a haunch of venison hanging from the rafters. By the time the woman sat up, moving slow and careful, he had tea steeping and meat sizzling in the iron skillet. She watched him work, her eyes tracking his movements with the wariness of someone who'd learned to calculate escape routes and measure distances to doors. He understood that look. He'd worn it himself back when the world still felt like something that might suddenly attack. You should eat, he said, not looking at her, giving her space to adjust. Need your strength back. She didn't argue, which told him she was practical under the fear. He brought her the food on a tin plate, along with the tea in a chipped ceramic mug that had been Rebecca's once, though he tried not to think about that. She took it with both hands, still shaking slightly, and ate slow, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Eli sat at the table, far enough away to not crowd her, and waited. She'd talk when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he needed to understand what he'd gotten himself into, who those men were, and what they wanted badly enough to torture a woman for it. After a long silence broken only by the crackle of the fire, she spoke. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger than it had been yesterday but still fragile. For cutting me down, for bringing me here. Don't need thanks, Eli said. Just need to know who's going to come looking for you. Those two men last night, they'll be back. She nodded, her eyes dropping to the mug in her hands. I know. They mentioned a name. Wade Driscoll. Said he was your brother-in-law. At the name, something flickered across her face. Not quite fear, something colder, something that looked almost like hate, if hate could be mixed with exhaustion and despair. He is, she said, was married to my husband's brother. No, wait, that's not right. She shook her head, trying to organize thoughts scattered by trauma. My husband, Jack, he died a year ago. Wade is Jack's brother. Was Jack's brother. Eli nodded quietly, not sure what else to say. Don't be, she said. Jack was kind, but he's gone. And Wade wants what Jack left me. Which is? She looked up at him, then, meeting his eyes for the first time. Hers were green, he noticed, the color of deep forest shade. Money, she said, or what money can buy. Jack and Wade owned a mine together, Silver Vein Mine down in Leadville. When Jack died, his share went to me, 60% of the operation. Wade has the other 40. He wants it all. Eli nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. A mine, money. 2 brothers, 1 dead, 1 living. A widow caught in the middle. So he's trying to force you to sign it over. Yes, she said. At first it was just pressure. Suggestions that I didn't understand mining, that I should let him handle everything. Then it got worse. Threats. He'd show up at my house at odd hours, stand outside my window, make sure I knew he was watching. He'd tell people in town that I was unstable, that grief had made me confused, that I needed family to look after me. Gaslighting, Eli said, surprised the word came to him. He'd heard it once from an army doctor who tried to explain why some soldiers went mad after battle, making someone doubt their own sanity until they'd believe anything just to make it stop. I suppose, she said, I just knew I was scared all the time. Scared to sleep. Scared to leave the house. Scared to stay in it. And every day he'd be there asking me to sign, telling me it was for my own good, that Jack would have wanted it, but you didn't sign. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No, I didn't sign. So 3 days ago, Wade and 2 of his men came to my house. They said we were going for a ride, to visit Jack's grave, to pay respects. I thought maybe he'd finally accepted that I wasn't going to give him the mine. I thought maybe we could find some kind of peace. She paused, staring into the fire, seeing something Eli couldn't see. We rode up into the mountains, she continued, higher than I'd ever been. Wade was friendly the whole time, talked about Jack, about good memories, about how families should stick together. And then we stopped in that clearing by that big tree, and he told me to get down from my horse. Her hands had started shaking again, tea sloshing in the mug. Eli wanted to tell her she didn't have to finish, but he needed to know, needed to understand what he was dealing with. He had rope, she said. New rope. He'd brought it with him. Planned it all. He said I had one more chance to sign the papers he'd brought. Transfer the mine to him. Make everything legal. If I signed, he'd take me back home. If I didn't, well. She gestured vaguely at her torso, at the bandages hidden beneath her torn dress and Eli's jacket. He tied me to that tree, but not around my neck, around my waist and legs. He explained it very carefully. Said if he hanged me proper, I'd die too quick. But this way, I could hang there for hours, days maybe, thinking about my choices, thinking about how much easier it would be to just sign. Jesus, Eli muttered. I prayed, she said. For the first few hours I prayed, asked God to save me or let me die quick. But after a while I stopped praying, started begging anyone who might hear, begging the trees, begging the wind, and then you came. She looked at him again, and this time her eyes were clear, focused. Why did you save me? She asked. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the first drops of rain began to patter against the roof. Had a wife once, he said finally. Rebecca and a daughter, Emma. They died 11 years ago. Plague swept through while I was away scouting. By the time I got back, they'd been dead 3 days. Neighbors didn't help, didn't check on them. Too scared of catching it themselves. He paused, surprised at himself for saying this much. I swore after that I'd never walk past someone in trouble again, he said. Never assume someone else would help. Never be too late one more time. Clara nodded slowly. And now you're in danger because of me. Those men, they know I'm here. Maybe, Eli said. Probably, but they don't know what they're walking into if they come back. What are you going to do? Keep you alive, Eli said. Then we're going to Denver. Going to find a lawyer who's not in Wade Driscoll's pocket. Going to get your claims strong enough that he can't touch you, no matter what he does. That's 4 days through the mountains, Clara said. Wade will hunt us. Eli stood, walked to where his rifle leaned against the wall, and checked the action. The metallic click of the lever echoed in the cabin. Let him try, he said. The rest of that day passed in tense preparation. Eli packed supplies while Clara rested, building back the strength torture had stolen. He filled saddlebags with dried meat and hardtack, spare ammunition, the medicines he'd need to keep Clara's wounds from festering. He checked his weapons, cleaned and oiled them, counted bullets. 30 rounds for the Henry rifle, 20 for each of the 2 Colt revolvers, enough to fight a small war if it came to that. Clara watched him work, and slowly, tentatively, she started to move around the cabin, testing her legs, assessing what her body could still do. She'd been a prisoner of fear for so long that she'd forgotten she had choices, that she could fight back. Eli saw it happening, the shift from victim to something else, something harder. As evening fell, bringing rain that drummed steady on the roof, Clara asked him to teach her to shoot. I've never held a gun, she said. Jack didn't believe women should. Said it wasn't proper. Eli pulled one of the Colts from its holster and handed it to her. She took it awkwardly, unprepared for the weight. It's heavy, she said. Means it's real, Eli replied. Means when you pull that trigger, something happens. That's good. You want to respect it. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Outside, the rain fell harder, providing cover for the small pops of the pistol as she fired into a log round Eli had set up as a target. She missed the first 5 shots, hit with the 6th, missed the next 4. But she was learning, and more importantly, she wasn't apologizing anymore. That night, Eli barred the door and wedged his chair against it. He sat with the rifle across his lap, dozing but never really sleeping. Clara slept fitfully, crying out once from a nightmare, then falling silent when Eli spoke her name. Around midnight, he heard movement outside. Footsteps, careful and quiet. He eased the hammer back on the Henry, the sound impossibly loud in the darkness. The door rattled. Someone testing it. I know you're in there, a voice called. Male, young, nervous, not Wade Driscoll, one of the hired men. Boss wants to talk. Just talk, nobody has to get hurt. Eli said nothing. Come on now, the voice continued. We know she's with you. We seen smoke from your chimney. We ain't going away. Still Eli stayed silent, watching the door, waiting. Then, because young men are often stupid and impatient, the man outside tried to force the door. Eli heard the crack of a shoulder hitting wood, heard the grunt of effort. The door held. The chair held. Eli remained seated, rifle pointed at the exact spot where anyone coming through that door would appear. A second impact, harder this time. The door shuddered but didn't give. Then footsteps, moving around the side of the cabin toward the window. Eli shifted, tracking the sound. His finger rested light on the trigger. The window was small, barely 2 feet square, and covered by a wooden shutter from the inside. The man would have to break it to get in. A crash. The shutter splintered. A hand reached through, fumbling for the latch. Eli could have shot him then, blown that groping hand into meat and bone fragments. Instead, he stood, moved fast across the cabin, and brought the rifle butt down on the intruding arm. Hard. The man screamed, pulled his arm back, cursed in a steady stream that would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. Eli heard him stumble away, crashing through the underbrush, still cursing. Behind him, Clara sat up, eyes wide, holding the Colt he'd left with her. She'd remembered to thumb back the hammer. Good. They're testing you, she said. Us, Eli corrected. They're testing us, and now they know we're not easy. Will they come back? Yes, Eli said, but not tonight. That man needs to tell his boss what happened, and Wade Driscoll needs to decide if I'm worth killing or just worth scaring. He moved back to his chair, rifle once again across his lap. Dawn was still 4 hours away, and those would be the longest 4 hours when exhaustion and fear made even strong men weak. Get some more sleep, he told Clara. Tomorrow we leave. I don't think I can sleep. Try anyway. You'll need it. She lay back down, but her eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling. Eli understood. Sleep was trust, and trust was dangerous when men with rope were looking for you. But eventually, somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, she did sleep. And Eli sat watching over her, this woman whose name he barely knew, whose story he was now part of, whose survival had become his responsibility, whether he wanted it or not. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, then stopped. The clouds parted enough to let through a sliver of moon, pale and cold. Somewhere in those mountains, Wade Driscoll was making plans. Somewhere men were saddling horses and checking weapons. Somewhere the wheels of violence were turning, grinding toward a collision that would test everything Eli had learned about surviving in a world that took everyone you loved and left you alone with your failures. But for now, in this moment, the cabin was quiet. The fire burned low. Clara breathed steady in sleep. And Elijah Coltrane sat in his chair, his finger resting on the trigger guard of his rifle, waiting for morning, waiting for movement, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of a man who'd learned that waiting was sometimes the only thing standing between life and death. The question wasn't whether Wade would come. The question was when and how many men he'd bring, and whether Eli could keep Clara alive long enough to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere that wasn't this cabin, isolated and exposed, surrounded by 1,000 places to hide and shoot from. Denver was 4 days away. 4 days through mountain passes where 3 men with rifles could stop an army if they knew the terrain. 4 days of exposure, of cold camps and hard riding, of looking over shoulders and sleeping with one eye open. But staying here meant dying here. Meant waiting for Wade to bring enough men that resistance became suicide. Meant Clara going back on that tree, or worse. So they'd go. At first light, they'd saddle up and ride, and whatever happened after that would happen. Eli had stopped trying to control outcomes years ago. The mountains taught you that. The mountains taught you that all you could do was keep moving, keep breathing, keep putting one foot in front of the other until your luck ran out or something changed. Outside, the night slowly surrendered to gray dawn. Birds began their morning songs, tentative at first, then confident. The world was waking up, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in isolated cabins. The sun would rise whether Eli and Clara lived or died. The seasons would turn, the mountains would stand. Nothing they did mattered to the vast indifference of stone and sky, but it mattered to them, and sometimes Eli thought that had to be enough. Dawn broke cold and sharp, the kind of morning that promised hard travel and harder choices. Eli woke to the smell of pine smoke and the sound of Clara moving around the cabin, tentative but determined. She dressed herself as best she could in her torn clothing, wrapped his leather jacket tight around her shoulders. In the gray light filtering through the shuttered window, she looked older than her 27 years, carved thin by fear and pain. But there was something new in her eyes, something that hadn't been there when he cut her down from that tree. Purpose, maybe, or just the understanding that sitting still meant dying. Eli stood, his back protesting the night spent in the chair, and began the final preparations. He'd done this before, packed for hard travel through hostile country, back when he'd scouted for the army, and every morning might be your last. The routine came back easy. Check weapons, count ammunition, divide supplies between the 2 saddlebags, so if one horse went down, they'd still have food, water, medicine. Think 3 moves ahead. Plan for everything going wrong because it usually did. Clara watched him work, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he'd made strong enough to strip paint. She didn't speak, which he appreciated. Talk was cheap when you were safe, my son. Silence meant you understood the weight of what was coming. When everything was packed and secured, Eli turned to him. "We've got 120 miles to Denver," he said. 4 days if the weather holds and nothing goes wrong. More likely 5 or 6. We'll travel during daylight, hole up at night, stay off the main trails where we can. "And if Wade catches us?" Clara asked. "Then we fight," Eli said simply. "But he won't catch us if we're smart and fast. You know how to ride?" "Some," she said. "Not well." "You'll learn," Eli said. "Payne's a good teacher." He brought the horses around from the lean to shelter behind the cabin. Ghost, his Appaloosa, and a Morgan mare he'd borrowed from a line camp 3 years back and never quite gotten around to returning. The mare was steady, which Clara would need. Ghost was battle-trained, which Eli would need if this went the way he expected. He helped Clara into the saddle, her movements stiff and painful. The rope burns were healing but nowhere near healed. Every shift of weight, every bounce of the horse's gait would remind her of what had been done. But she set her jaw and gripped the reins, and when Eli swung up onto Ghost, she nodded once. Ready. They left the cabin as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, painting the high country gold and red. Eli didn't look back. Looking back was for people who planned to return, and he'd learned a long time ago that plans were just wishes written in water. The mountains had their own plans, and men either adapted or died. The first hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the steady clip of hooves on stone. Eli led them northeast, away from Leadville, up toward Bitterroot Pass. It was the hard way to Denver, the highway, but it kept them off the wagon roads where Wade's men might be watching. The trail, such as it was, climbed steep and narrow, switchbacking through stands of aspen and lodgepole pine, the air thinning as they gained elevation. Clara struggled but didn't complain. Eli watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she learned to move with the horse instead of fighting it, how she distributed her weight to ease the pressure on her injuries. Tough, he thought. Tougher than she knew. Most people who'd been through what she'd been through would still be curled up crying. She was riding toward the men who tortured her, more or less, because staying put meant dying slow. By midday, they'd climbed above 10,000 feet. The trees thinned out here, giving way to meadows of brown grass and scattered boulders big as houses. Snow dusted the highest peaks, and the wind cut cold despite the September sun. Eli called a halt near a trickle of snowmelt, let the horses drink and blow. Clara dismounted awkward, nearly fell, caught herself against the mare's shoulder. "How much farther today?" she asked, her voice tight with pain she was trying to hide. "Another 6 hours," Eli said. "Maybe 7. Depends on how the pass looks." She nodded, pulled a piece of jerky from the saddlebag, chewed it mechanical. Eli studied the back trail, looking for dust, for movement, for the telltale glint of sun on metal that meant rifles. Nothing yet. But Wade wouldn't give up easy. Men who tortured women for money didn't walk away because their prey vanished. They hunted. They mounted up again, pushed on through the afternoon. The trail grew rougher, rocks loose underfoot, the horses picking their way careful. Twice Eli had to dismount and lead Ghost over sections where a misstep would mean a 100-foot fall onto jagged stone. Clara followed his example, her face pale but determined. As the sun dipped toward the western ridges, Eli spotted what he'd been looking for. A small cave, really just an overhang in a cliff face, but deep enough to hide a fire and positioned where anyone approaching would be visible from 100 yards out. Defensible. He led them up to it, helped Clara down, and began making camp. No fire yet. Fire meant smoke, and smoke meant a signal that could be seen for miles. They'd wait until full dark, build it small and hot, let it die before moonrise. Meanwhile, Eli unpacked their bedrolls, set out food, checked the horses' hooves for stones. The familiar motions of survival, older than civilization, older than law. Clara sat on a flat rock, watching him work. After a long silence, she spoke. "Tell me about your wife." Eli's hands stilled on the rope he was coiling. He hadn't expected that, hadn't talked about Rebecca to anyone in 11 years, hadn't even said her name out loud. "Why I am Jabiyasti?" he asked. "Because you saved me," Clara said. "Because I want to know why a man who lives alone in the mountains would risk his life for a stranger. And I think it has something to do with her." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, because the mountain silence demanded truth and because Clara had earned it with her courage, he told her. "Rebecca was a school teacher," he said, "back in Ohio, before the war, before I signed up to scout for Custer. She was small, barely came up to my shoulder, but she had a spine like iron. Told me I was a fool for going west. Told me the army would get me killed." He smiled, a ghost of expression. "She was right about the fool part, wrong about the killed part, though I suppose there's still time." Clara waited, patient. "We had a daughter," Eli continued, "Emma. 8 years old when the plague came through. I was 200 miles north, tracking Sioux war parties that weren't even there. By the time I got word and rode back, they'd been dead 3 days. The neighbors, good Christian folk, had left food on the porch but wouldn't come inside, too scared of catching it." His voice had gone flat, empty of everything but the facts. "I buried them myself, burned the house, rode west until I couldn't ride anymore. Built that cabin, and I've been there ever since because the one time I wasn't there when I should have been, everyone I loved died." Clara nodded slowly. "So you saved me because you couldn't save them?" "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe I saved you because leaving someone to die in a tree isn't something a man does and still gets to call himself a man." "My husband used to say something similar," Clara said. "Jack believed in doing right even when it cost you. Wade hated him for it, called him weak, called me weak for loving him. Wade's definition of strength is just cruelty with a nicer name, Eli said. I know that now, Clara said. Took me a while. Jack died 14 months ago. Mining accident, they said. Tunnel collapsed while he was inspecting the north shaft. They found his body 3 days later, crushed under a ton of rock. She paused, staring at her hands. But before he died, Jack told me Wade was stealing from the mine. Cooking the books, selling ore on the side, pocketing the difference. He said he was going to confront Wade, make him pay it back, or turn him in. And then 2 weeks later, Jack was dead. Eli's eyes sharpened. You think Wade killed him? I know he did, Clara said. Dr. Hewitt, the town doctor, he's an old friend of Jack's. After the funeral, he pulled me aside, told me the injuries on Jack's body didn't match a cave-in, said the blow to the back of Jack's head came before the rocks fell, said it looked like someone had hit him first, then arranged the collapse. Did you go to the sheriff? Clara laughed bitter. Sheriff Dawson? He and Wade drink together every Saturday night. I went to him with my suspicions, and he patted my hand like I was a confused child. Told me grief makes women hysterical. Told me to go home and let the men handle business. Eli grunted. He'd met 100 Sheriff Dawsons in his life. Men who wore badges but served power, not justice. So Wade got away with murder, he said. Yes, Clara said, and then he started working on me. Slow at first, just stopping by to check on the widow, making sure I was managing the mine properly, suggesting I sign power of attorney so he could handle the complicated parts. When I refused, the visits got more frequent, more aggressive. He'd show up at midnight, bang on my door, demand to talk. He'd follow me to the general store, stand too close, whisper things. What kind of things? Clara's hands clenched. That Jack had been too soft with me. That a woman needed a firm hand. That he could teach me to obey if I'd let him. And when I still wouldn't sign, when I threatened to hire my own lawyer, he stopped pretending to be civilized. The cave had grown dark around them. Eli judged it safe now and built a small fire, just enough to boil water for coffee and push back the cold. The flames cast jumping shadows on the stone walls. That's when he took me into the mountains, Clara finished. Told me I had one last chance. Sign or suffer. And you chose suffering, Eli said. I chose not to let him win, Clara corrected. There's a difference. They ate in silence after that. Jerky and hardtack washed down with bitter coffee. Eli banked the fire until it was just coals, then laid out his bedroll near the cave mouth where he could watch the trail. Clara took the deeper part, the safer position. He didn't offer explanations. She didn't ask for them. As the stars came out, cold and sharp, Clara spoke one more time. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for not asking if I did something to deserve it. Nobody deserves that, Eli said. Not you, not anyone. She was silent for a moment, then, the world disagrees with you. Then the world's wrong, Eli said. Wouldn't be the first time. He heard her settle into the bedroll, heard her breathing eventually slow and deepen. But he stayed awake, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. Somewhere out there, Wade Driscoll was moving pieces on a board only he could see, and Eli needed to be ready when those pieces came together. The attack, when it came at dawn. Eli woke to the sound that wasn't quite right, the scrape of boot on stone that was too careful, too deliberate. He was moving before his eyes were fully open, rolling sideways, bringing the rifle up. Behind him, Clara gasped awake. Down, Eli hissed. Stay down. 3 men spread out across the slope below the cave, 2 with rifles, 1 with a pistol. They'd approached quiet, thinking to catch their prey asleep. Now they froze, caught in the moment between stealth and violence. Eli recognized one of them from the cabin, the young fool who tried to break through the window. The other 2 were strangers, but they all had the same look. Hired guns, men who did wet work for money and didn't ask questions as long as the pay was good. That's far enough, Eli called out, his voice echoing off the rocks. Another step, and I start shooting. The 3 men looked at each other, calculating odds. 3 against 1 should be easy, but the one was uphill, in cover, with a rifle already aimed, and they were exposed, standing in the open like targets at a turkey shoot. The young one, the fool, made the mistake. He brought his rifle up fast, maybe thinking speed would save him. It didn't. Eli shot him through the chest, the Henry's report cracking loud in the mountain air. The man went down hard, didn't move again. The other two scattered, diving behind rocks, returning fire. Bullets spanged off stone, whined past Eli's head. He ducked back, levered another round, came up shooting. Caught the second man in the leg as he tried to reposition. The man screamed, went down, clutching his thigh. The third man, the one with the pistol, was smarter. He didn't try to fight. He turned and ran, scrambling down the slope, using rocks for cover. Eli could have killed him easy, but he let him go. Let him run back to Wade with news of what happened when you cornered a mountain man who knew how to shoot. Eli waited 5 minutes, watching for movement, making sure no one else was coming. Then he worked his way down to where the second man lay bleeding. The man was young, maybe 25, his face twisted with pain. The leg wound was bad, but not fatal if it got treated soon. Eli knelt beside him, rifle still trained. "Who sent you?" he asked, though he already knew. "Wade Driscoll," the man gasped, "paying $1,000 for the woman. Dead or alive." "How many more of you?" "Just us three, and Tom Grady and the boss himself. They're coming up from Leadville. Should be here by tonight." Eli nodded. That matched what he'd expected. Wade keeping a safe distance, letting hired men do the dangerous work first. "What's your name?" Eli asked. "Henry," the man said. "Henry Cooper." "Well, Henry Cooper, I'm going to do you a favor," Eli said. He pulled the bandana from around his own neck and tied it tight around Henry's leg, slowing the bleeding. "I'm leaving you alive. You make your way back to Leadville, you tell everyone you meet what happened here. You tell them Wade Driscoll's hired guns aren't worth the money he's paying." "He'll kill me," Henry said, "for failing." "Maybe," Eli said, "but if you stay here, you'll die for sure. Wolves get hungry at night." He stood, backed away, keeping the rifle on Henry until he was sure the man wasn't going to try anything stupid. Then he climbed back to the cave, where Clara stood holding the Colt he'd given her, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "He dead?" she asked. "The first one." "Yes," Eli said. "So, good," Clara said, and there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there yesterday. "I'm glad. Is that wrong?" "No," Eli said. "That's survival. That's understanding that some men only stop when they're dead." They broke camp fast, leaving Henry to his fate. The third man, the one who'd run, would be miles away by now, and Henry wasn't going anywhere fast with that leg. Eli helped Clara into the saddle, checked their back trail, then led them higher into the mountains. They'd lost the advantage of anonymity now. Wade knew where they'd been as of dawn, knew they were heading northeast. He'd adjust his pursuit accordingly. But they had a head start, and Eli knew these mountains better than any hired gun from Leadville. If they could reach the pass before Wade caught up, they'd have options. The day turned into hard riding, pushing the horses as fast as the terrain allowed. They climbed through country that got progressively wilder, more remote. Places where the trees grew twisted from constant wind, where the rocks thrust up like broken teeth. Clara held on grimly, her face pale with pain and exhaustion. But she didn't ask to stop, didn't slow them down. By afternoon, they had crossed the first ridge of Bitterroot Pass, a narrow trail that wound between cliffs, dropping hundreds of feet on either side. Eli rode ahead, checking for ambush points, making sure the path was clear. Behind him, Clara followed on the Morgan mare, trusting him because she had no other choice. They were halfway across when Eli spotted movement ahead. He threw up his hand, signaled to stop. Clara reined in, her hand going to the pistol on her hip. Eli dismounted, crept forward on foot, using rocks for cover. A man stood in the trail, hands raised, no weapon visible. But it was his posture that stopped Eli from shooting immediately. The posture of someone who wanted to talk, not fight. "Don't shoot," the man called. "I'm not here to hurt you." Eli kept the rifle trained on him. "Who are you?" "Tom Grady," the man said. "I work for Wade Driscoll. Or I did, until today." Behind Eli, Clara's voice was sharp. "I know him. He was there. When Wade tied me to that tree, he watched." Tom Grady flinched like he'd been struck. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I didn't know Wade would go that far. I thought he just wanted to scare you." "That's a hell of an excuse," Eli said coldly. "It's not an excuse," Tom said. "It's an explanation. I was wrong. I should have stopped him. But I need you to listen to me now, because what I'm about to tell you might save your life." Eli didn't lower the rifle. "Talk fast." Tom took a breath. 2 years ago, Wade Driscoll killed my brother, Jacob Grady. Jacob worked as the mine bookkeeper, kept the accounts for Jack Doyle. He found out Wade was embezzling $20,000 over 3 years. Jacob went to Wade, told him to pay it back or he'd tell Jack. 3 days later, Jacob was dead. Hunting accident, they called it. Shot in the back by his own gun, supposedly. But Jacob was careful. He didn't make mistakes like that. Clara's voice came sharp from behind. Why didn't you go to the sheriff? Same reason you didn't, Tom said. Because the sheriff's in Wade's pocket. Because in Leadville, Wade Driscoll owns the law and half the businesses and enough people that speaking against him is suicide. So you joined him, Eli said. Became one of his men. So I could kill him, Tom corrected. I've been waiting 2 years gathering proof. Letters between Wade and the railroad company. Bank statements showing the embezzled money. Jacob's ledger with the real numbers. Everything needed to hang him. Why tell us this? Eli asked. Because Wade's not just coming after you for the mine anymore, Tom said. He's made a deal with Denver and Northern Railroad. They want the mineral rights to build a tunnel through the mountain. If Wade controls the mine, he can sell those rights for $100,000. That's his real play. The mine itself is just the key to bigger money. He paused, met Clara's eyes. And because I saw what he did to you, Mrs. Doyle, and I couldn't live with myself if I let him finish it. I'm not a good man, but I'm trying to be a better one than I was. Eli studied him, reading posture, tone, the small tells that separated truth from lies. Tom Grady was scared, truly scared, and angry. The kind of anger that came from guilt and grief mixed together. Eli recognized it because he'd worn it himself for 11 years. You got a horse? Eli asked finally. Down the trail, Tom said, hidden in the trees. Get it, Eli said. You're coming with us to Denver. And if you're lying, if this is a trap, I'll kill you myself. Understand? Tom nodded. Understood. He disappeared into the trees, returned 5 minutes later, leading a sorrel gelding. The three of them rode together then, an uneasy alliance born of shared enemies and desperate circumstances. Clara kept her distance from Tom, and Eli kept his rifle where he could swing it around fast if needed. But Tom didn't try anything. He rode silent, lost in thoughts that probably weren't pleasant. They made good time through the afternoon, the trail dropping down from the high pass into a valley where Cold River ran clear and fast over smooth stones. Eli called a halt at a ford, let the horses drink. The water was ice cold, snow melt from the peaks, so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom. Tom dismounted, filled his canteen. Wade's 6 hours behind us, he said. Maybe less. He pushed hard after Henry came back with news of the ambush. He's got 4 men with him now, all professionals, not like Henry and the others. How many does he need to kill 2 people? Clara asked bitterly. As many as it takes, Tom said. Wade doesn't take chances, not anymore. He knows you're dangerous now, Mrs. Doyle. He knows you've got the mountain men protecting you. He'll come heavy. Let him come, Eli said, but he was thinking fast, calculating odds and distances. 6 men, all armed, all paid to kill. Even with the advantage of terrain, even with surprise, those weren't good odds. And Clara couldn't fight, not really. One woman learning to shoot didn't add much to their firepower. They needed to reach Denver, needed to get Clara in front of a judge before Wade caught them, which meant keeping ahead of pursuit for 3 more days. And 3 days was a long time when professional killers were on your trail. They mounted up again, pushed on. The afternoon shadows grew long. The valley narrowed, the river bending sharp to the left. Eli studied the terrain, professional assessment. This was ambush country, hills rising steep on both sides, plenty of cover, the river forcing travelers into a predictable path. We need to move faster, he said, get through this stretch before dark. They urged the horses to a trot, dangerous on the uneven ground but necessary. Behind them, somewhere in the mountains, Wade Driscoll was riding hard, closing the distance. Ahead, the valley narrowed further, the river running white over rapids, the trail barely wide enough for 1 horse at a time. They were halfway through when Tom Grady spoke again. I'm sorry, he said. Eli turned in the saddle, saw Tom reaching for his rifle. For one terrible moment, he thought he'd been betrayed. Then he saw where Tom was aiming. Not at them, at the ridge above. Wade Driscoll stood there, silhouetted against the sunset, rifle to his shoulder. And beside him, 4 other men, all armed, all aiming down at the river. Time compressed the way it does in combat. Eli saw Tom bring his rifle around, saw the muzzle flash from Wade's gun, saw Tom jerk backwards, struck 3 times in quick succession, saw Tom fall from his horse into the river, the water turning red around him. "Go!" Eli shouted at Clara. "Downstream! Don't stop!" She hesitated for one heartbeat, torn between fear and the instinct not to abandon him. Then she kicked the Morgan hard, sent it plunging downstream through the shallows. Smart woman. She understood that survival mattered more than heroism. Eli fired twice at the ridge, not aiming to kill, but to disrupt, to buy Clara seconds. Then he wheeled Ghost around and followed her, bullets kicking up spray around him. One round caught his shoulder, burning through muscle, but he stayed in the saddle, kept moving. Behind him, Tom Grady's body floated face down in the current, following them downstream like an accusation. The river carried them through chaos. Wade's men were firing from above, working their way down the steep hillside, trying to get ahead of them. Eli returned fire when he could, one-handed, the other hand controlling Ghost through the rapids. The Appaloosa was sure-footed, picking his way between rocks, jumping obstacles. Behind him, Clara clung to the Morgan's neck, the mare panicking but still moving. Then the river dropped away, a 6-foot waterfall that neither rider saw until they were on top of it. Ghost jumped, landed hard, nearly went down. Eli kept him up through sheer force of will. The Morgan jumped clean, but Clara lost her seat, tumbled into the water. Eli watched her go under, pop up gasping, and sweep away around the bend. He should have gone after her, should have helped. But 3 of Wade's men were coming down the hillside fast, and if he stopped to fish Clara out of the river, they'd both die. So he did the hardest thing a man can do. He made the choice that might save one of them. He turned Ghost upstream, toward the men pursuing them, toward the gunfire, drawing them away from Clara, giving her a chance to survive even if he didn't. The next minutes were violence without thought, the kind of fighting that came from instinct and training, and the part of a man that doesn't think, just reacts. Eli rode hard at the first man to reach the riverbank, drove Ghost into him, knocked him sprawling, shot the second man as he tried to get a clear shot, missed the third, took return fire that shattered his rifle stock and numbed his hands. He dropped the useless Henry, pulled his Colt, fired point blank at the third man, hit him twice, center mass. The man went down. But there were more coming, and Eli's shoulder was bleeding bad, and Ghost was favoring his left front leg. Time to go. He wheeled Ghost back downstream, following the path Clara had taken. The river had carried her a mile, maybe more. He prayed she'd had the sense to get out, to hide, to keep moving. Prayed she remembered what he'd taught her about following water downstream to civilization. But he couldn't see her anywhere. Just empty riverbank and gathering darkness. Ghost's injured leg forced them to move slower than Eli wanted, the stallion limping but game. Night fell fast in the mountains. Eli rode until Ghost couldn't run anymore, then led the horse into thick timber and made a cold camp. No fire, just darkness and pain and the sound of his own ragged breathing. He bandaged his shoulder as best he could with cloth torn from his shirt. The wound crude work, but functional. The bullet had gone through clean, muscle damage, but nothing vital hit. He'd survive. But where was Clara? He'd failed her. Let her wash away in the current while he played hero. Let her disappear into the mountains alone, injured, hunted. Everything he'd sworn not to do, he'd done. Left someone behind, arrived too late, failed to protect what mattered. Just like Rebecca, just like Emma. The night stretched cold and empty around him, and Elijah Coltrane sat against a tree, rifleless, wounded, alone, and wondered if this was how it ended. Not with glory or redemption, but with exhaustion and mistakes and the knowledge that you'd lost everyone who depended on you. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not while there was a chance Clara was still alive. So when dawn came gray and cold, he'd get back on Ghost and he'd search. Search until he found her or found her body or died trying. Because that's what a man did when he'd made a promise, even an unspoken one. He kept going until there was nothing left to give. Clara woke to the sound of water and the smell of wet earth. Her body ached in ways that went beyond the rope burns, beyond the exhaustion. Every muscle screamed protest as she opened her eyes to find herself on a muddy riverbank, surrounded by reeds and willows, the morning sun filtering through branches overhead. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she'd gotten here. Then it came back in fragments. The ambush. Tom Grady falling. Eli shouting at her to run. The horse jumping, her losing her grip. The river pulling her under, tumbling her over rocks, filling her mouth and nose with cold water that tasted of stone and snow. Swimming or trying to, grabbing at branches, finally catching one that held long enough for her to drag herself onto the bank before darkness took her. She sat up slowly, inventory her damage. Cuts and bruises everywhere. Her dress torn beyond repair. The Colt revolver Eli had given her, miraculously, still in its holster, the leather thong keeping it secured. Her hair hung in muddy tangles, but she was alive. Against all odds, impossibly, she was alive. The question was, for how long? She looked upstream, searching for any sign of Eli, any movement that might be him coming to find her. Nothing, just the river running endless, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out along its banks. He could be dead, probably was dead if he'd turned back to fight Wade's men the way she thought he had, which meant she was alone in the wilderness 2 days from Denver, with killers hunting her. Clara touched the pistol at her hip. 4 rounds left, Eli had told her. 4 chances to defend herself. Not enough, but more than nothing. She thought about what Eli had taught her. Follow water downstream. It leads to people eventually. Stay hidden during the day. Move at dawn and dusk when hunters had trouble seeing. Trust your instincts. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying with exhaustion and pain. Her legs threatened to buckle, but she locked her knees and stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. Wade Driscoll wanted her broken, wanted her begging, wanted her to sign away everything Jack had left her and then die grateful for the mercy. Well, she'd already been to hell on that tree. Going back wasn't an option. She started walking downstream, keeping to the tree line, moving slow and careful. Every 50 yards she'd stop, listen, scan for pursuit. The forest was waking up around her. Birds calling, squirrels chittering, a deer watching her from a thicket, then bounding away when she got too close. Normal sounds, nothing human, not yet. By mid-morning, she'd covered maybe 3 miles. Her feet were blistered, her throat parched despite drinking from the river. She needed rest, needed food, needed about 1,000 things she didn't have. What she did have was a saddlebag that had somehow stayed tied to her belt during the river chaos. Side wrapped in oilcloth were the documents Tom Grady had given her just before the ambush. Letters, ledgers, proof of Wade's crimes. She'd forgotten about them in the panic of running. Now she pulled them out, careful despite her shaking hands, and studied what Tom had died to protect. Bank statements showing deposits that didn't match the mine's books. Letters from Denver and Northern Railroad discussing mineral rights and payments. And most damning, a ledger in Jack's handwriting, his careful accounting showing exactly how much Wade had stolen. $20,000 over 3 years. Evidence that would convict Wade if she could get it to someone who cared about justice more than money. A sound froze her in place. Voices, male voices, coming from upstream. Clara dove into a thicket of scrub oak, pulled branches over herself, tried to breathe quiet. Through the leaves, she watched 2 men walk past, rifles slung casual over their shoulders. Wade's men had to be, looking for her. One of them said something about checking downstream. The other laughed. They passed within 10 feet of where she hid, so close she could smell the tobacco they were chewing. When their voices faded, she stayed frozen another 10 minutes, making sure they weren't doubling back. Then she moved again, faster now, fear giving her strength her body didn't have. She had to reach Denver, had to find someone, anyone who could stop Wade. And she had to do it before Wade found her first. The day ground on, hot and endless. Clara's vision started to blur, exhaustion and dehydration taking their toll. She stumbled more often, caught herself on trees, kept moving through sheer force of will. Once she heard horses and had to climb into a deadfall, press herself into the hollow under a massive fallen pine, stay motionless while riders passed. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it. But they kept going, and she was still free. By late afternoon, she was hallucinating, seeing Eli in the trees, hearing his voice telling her to keep moving, seeing Jack, her dead husband, walking beside her, his kind face encouraging her, seeing her mother, dead these 10 years, reaching out to help. She knew none of it was real, knew her mind was starting to break from exhaustion, but the visions kept her moving when her body wanted to quit. Then, as the sun dipped low, she heard something different. Not horses, Not men. A wagon. The creak of wood and jingle of harness. She pushed through the last screen of willows and found herself at a dirt road, barely more than 2 ruts through the grass. And coming toward her, slow and steady, was a farm wagon pulled by 2 mules. A man drove, weathered and lean, maybe 50. Beside him sat a woman, plump and motherly, wearing a bonnet and a dress that had seen better days. In the back of the wagon, 2 children played some game with sticks, their laughter carrying clear. Clara stepped into the road, raised her hand, tried to speak. Her voice came out as a croak. The man pulled the mules to a stop, his hand going to the rifle under the seat. Suspicious, as anyone would be seeing a wild woman stagger out of the forest. "Please," Clara managed, "I need help." The woman in the bonnet took one look at Clara and made a decision that probably saved her life. She climbed down from the wagon, moved toward Clara with the confidence of someone who had doctored hurt things before. "John," she said to the man, not looking back, "get the canteen and the blanket." "Martha, we don't know who she is," John protested. "She's a woman who needs help," Martha said firmly. "That's all I need to know." She caught Clara as her legs finally gave out, lowered her gently to the ground. The canteen appeared, and Clara drank greedily until Martha pulled it away. "Slow," Martha said. "You'll make yourself sick." "Men," Clara gasped. "Hunting me. Dangerous." Once John's expression sharpened. He looked up and down the road. "I saw him." Then at the forest. "How many?" "6," Clara said. "Maybe more. Led by Wade Driscoll from Leadville. He wants to kill me." John and Martha exchanged a look, some communication passing between them that Clara was too exhausted to read. Then John nodded once. "Get her in the wagon," he said. "We're 2 miles from home. We can make it before dark if we push." They lifted Clara into the wagon bed, where the children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10, stared at her with wide eyes. Martha climbed back, cradled Clara's head in her lap, and John whipped up the mules to a pace that was nearly a trot. The next hour passed in a blur of pain and motion, the wagon bouncing over ruts, Martha's hands gentle on her forehead, the children's whispered questions and their mother's soft answers. Then they were pulling into a farmyard, small and neat, a log house with a stone chimney, barn and chicken coop, and a garden going to seed. John carried Clara inside while Martha shooed the children toward the barn with instructions to feed the animals. The house was one room with a loft, simple but clean, the kind of place built by people who had little but took care of what they had. They laid Clara on a real bed, the first she'd touched since Eli's cabin, and Martha began the work of cleaning and bandaging. "What's your name, child?" Martha asked as she worked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Doyle. I'm Martha Fletcher. That's my husband, John. Those were our children, Sarah and Michael. And you're safe here for tonight at least." "Wade will come," Clara said. "He'll find me. I should go." "You should rest," Martha said firmly. "And tomorrow John will take you to Denver. We've got a wagon, good mules. You'll be there by nightfall." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why help me? You don't know me." Martha's hands paused in their work. 3 years ago, she said, John and I were traveling through Utah. Our wagon broke an axle in the middle of nowhere. We had the children, no food, no water. We would have died if a passing stranger hadn't stopped. Man named Jacob Grady. He fixed our wagon, shared his food, wouldn't take payment. Said helping people was its own reward. Clara's breath caught. "Jacob Grady? Tom's brother?" "I don't know about any Tom," Martha said. "But Jacob saved our lives, and he told us if we ever had the chance to help someone else, we should. Said that's how kindness spreads. So when you came out of those trees looking half dead, I heard Jacob's voice in my head, and I knew what I had to do." Clara started to cry then, silent tears sliding down her face. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that, but from the sudden weight of understanding that good people still existed, that Tom had died protecting evidence that might save her, that his brother had lived a life that rippled out in unexpected ways, saving strangers who would then save other strangers. That kindness, however small, mattered. She slept that night in a real bed, covered with a quilt Martha had made, her belly full of soup and bread. John stood watch outside with his rifle, scanning the darkness for riders who didn't come. And when dawn broke cool and clear, they loaded Clara into the wagon, covered her with blankets and corn sacks, and set out for Denver. The day passed slow and tense. Every time they met another wagon or rider on the road, Clara would burrow deeper into her hiding place, heart pounding, sure this was Wade catching up. But John and Martha played their parts perfectly. Just farmers heading to market. Nothing unusual. Once, a man on horseback called out, asking if they'd seen a woman traveling alone. John said no, and the rider moved on, and Clara breathed again. After 2 days of careful travel, covering nearly 80 miles through foothills and prairie, the mountains began to fall away behind them. And there, shimmering in the heat haze, Clara saw Denver. Not the grand city its boosters claimed it to be, but a real town nonetheless. Buildings of brick and wood, streets laid out in grids, church spires and saloons, and the orderly chaos of civilization trying to take root in wilderness. John drove straight to a building on Larimer Street, a 2-story structure with a sign reading Josiah Brennan, attorney at law. He helped Clara down from the wagon, steadied her when she swayed, and walked her to the door. "This is as far as we can take you," he said. "But Dr. Hewitt in Leadville, he sent word ahead, told this lawyer to expect you, said he's honest, which is rare." Clara gripped his hand. "Thank you, both of you. I'll never forget this." Martha hugged her, quick and fierce. "You survive, you hear? Don't let the bastards win." Then they were gone, back to their farm and their simple life, and Clara was alone again. But not as alone as she'd been. She had proof now, had allies, had a chance. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The office was cramped and cluttered, shelves overflowing with law books, papers stacked everywhere in a system that probably made sense to someone. Behind a desk sat a man in his 50s, gray hair, wire-rimmed spectacles, waistcoat that had seen better days. He looked up when Clara entered, took one look at her and stood quickly. "Mrs. Doyle, I presume," he said. "Josiah Brennan, please sit before you fall down." Clara collapsed into the chair across from his desk. "Dr. Hewitt told you about me?" "He did," Josiah said. "Sent a telegram 3 days ago. Said Wade Driscoll was trying to steal your mind and might try to kill you. I see he was right on both counts." His eyes traveled over her injuries, her torn dress, her general state of barely controlled disaster. "Where's the mountain man? Hewitt mentioned someone was helping you." "Dead," Clara said, her voice flat. "Or as good as. We were ambushed. I got away. He didn't." "I'm sorry," Josiah said, and sounded like he meant it. "But you're here now, and you're alive. That's what matters." "Do you have the evidence Hewitt mentioned?" Clara pulled out Tom's saddlebag, laid the documents on the desk. Josiah read through them, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he sat back, removed his spectacles, rubbed his eyes. "This is damning," he said. "More than enough to convict Wade of embezzlement and fraud. Probably murder too, if we can connect the dots. But there's a problem." "Of course there is," Clara said bitterly. "Judge Morrison," Josiah said. "He's the territorial judge for this district, and he's been on Wade Driscoll's payroll for the last 3 years. If we file charges here, Morrison will bury them, rule the evidence inadmissible, declare you an unreliable witness. Wade will walk free, and you'll be discredited." Clara felt the last of her hope starting to crack. "So what do I do? Just let him win?" "No," Josiah said firmly. "We go over Morrison's head, appeal directly to Governor Hoyt in Cheyenne. He's the territorial governor appointed by Washington. He's not perfect, but he's not bought. If we can get your case in front of him, with this evidence, Wade Driscoll will hang." "How long will that take?" "A week to get the paperwork filed, another week for the hearing, if we're lucky." "I don't have 2 weeks," Clara said. "Wade's in Denver by now, or will be soon. He won't stop until I'm dead." Josiah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, "I have a colleague, Samuel Pierce. He runs a boarding house for women in difficult situations. It's discreet, protected. You can stay there while we work. Wade won't find you." "You don't know Wade," Clara said. "No," Josiah admitted, "but I know the law. And the law, when it actually works, is stronger than any one man, even Wade Driscoll." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that justice existed somewhere in this world. But she'd been betrayed too many times, hurt too often. Still, what choice did she have? She couldn't survive alone, couldn't hide forever. "All right," she said, 2 weeks. "But if Wade comes, if he finds me, I'm not going down without a fight." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Josiah said. He stood, offered his arm. "Come, let's get you somewhere safe. And tomorrow we start building the case that puts Wade Driscoll in a noose." They were halfway to the door when it burst open. Clara's hand went to the Colt at her hip, drew it before she'd consciously decided to. But the man who stumbled through wasn't Wade. It was Eli. He looked half dead, shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages, face haggard, clothes torn and filthy, but alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Eli, Clara breathed this. He leaned against the door frame, breathing hard. Found your trail at the Fletcher farm. Followed the wagon tracks. I thought you were dead. I thought you were dead, Clara said. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Clara did something she hadn't done in over a year. She moved forward and hugged another human being, fiercely, desperately, needing to confirm he was real and warm and breathing. Eli stood rigid for a moment, like he'd forgotten what human comfort felt like. Then his arms came up, awkward but genuine, and held her. You did good, he said quietly. Getting away, staying alive. You did real good. So did you, Clara said into his shoulder. Thank you for everything. Josiah cleared his throat. As touching as this is, we should move. If you found Mrs. Doyle, others can too. They relocated to the boarding house, a modest 3-story building on the edge of town. The proprietor, Samuel Pierce, was a thin man with kind eyes who asked no questions and offered no judgments. He showed Clara to a small room on the second floor, brought hot water for washing and clean clothes, told her dinner was at 6 and to rest until then. Eli took the room next to hers, refused medical attention beyond what he'd already done for himself. When Clara protested, he just shook his head. Seen worse, he said. I'll live. That's a low bar, Clara said. It's the only bar that matters, Eli replied. Over the next week, Josiah worked furiously on the legal petition while Eli healed and Clara tried to remember how to exist without constant fear. The shoulder wound was deep but clean, and with proper rest and Clara's careful tending, the bleeding stopped and strength slowly returned. It was harder than she expected. Every footstep in the hall made her jump. Every stranger on the street could be Wade. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of rope and rivers and Tom Grady's face as the bullets hit. But slowly, hour by hour, she began to reclaim pieces of herself. She bathed, ate regular meals, let her body heal. And she spent time with Eli, the strange man who'd saved her life multiple times and asked nothing in return. On the 7th night, they sat in the boarding house parlor, a quiet room with worn furniture and a fireplace that barely worked. Clara worked on mending the dress Martha Fletcher had given her. Eli sat by the window watching the street, always watching. Tell me about Emma, Clara said suddenly. Eli's hands stilled on the rifle he was cleaning. Why? Because I want to know. Because she mattered. Because talking about the people we've loved keeps them alive somehow. Eli was quiet so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she liked bugs, he said. Beetles and grasshoppers and things most girls screamed at. She'd catch them in jars, study them, ask me questions I couldn't answer. Why do fireflies glow? How do ants know where to go? Where do butterflies come from? He paused. I told her I'd teach her to track animals when she got older. Show her how to read the forest. She was so excited about that. She sounds wonderful, Clara said. She was, Eli said. Oh, no. Rebecca, too. My wife, she was patient in ways I never learned to be. Could explain things so they made sense. Could make you believe everything would work out even when it wouldn't. You love them very much. Yes, Eli said simply, and then they were gone. And I spent 11 years trying to make sure I never loved anything again. Clara set down her mending. Did it work? Eli looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. No, he said. Turns out you can't choose not to care. You just choose whether to run from it or face it. Before Clara could respond, running footsteps sounded in the hall. Josiah burst into the room, face flushed, waving papers. We have a problem, he said, a big one. They followed him to his office, where he spread documents across his desk. Judge Morrison filed an injunction this morning. He's declaring you mentally incompetent, Mrs. Doyle. Says you're suffering from grief-induced hysteria. He's appointed Wade Driscoll as your legal guardian, with authority to make decisions on your behalf. He can't do that, Clara said. He just did, Josiah said. And there's more. There's a warrant out for your arrest. And one for you too, Coltrane. Kidnapping, coercion, unlawful detention of a vulnerable woman. Eli's jaw tightened. Wade's version of events. Yes, Josiah said. He's claiming you abducted Mrs. Doyle from her home, forced her into the mountains, and have been holding her against her will. He's the concerned family member trying to rescue his sister-in-law from a dangerous mountain man. That's insane, Clara said. I'll testify. Tell everyone what really happened. And Morrison will rule your testimony unreliable due to your mental incompetence, Josiah said. It's a neat trap. Wade's got the law on his side now. So what do we do? Eli asked. Josiah smiled grimly. We go to Cheyenne tomorrow. Get you in front of Governor Hoyt before Morrison can move to extradite you. It's risky. The train station will be watched. But it's our only shot. They spent that night preparing. Josiah hired a private coach to take them to the station before dawn. Eli checked their weapons, packed light. Clara wrote out her full testimony, every detail, in case she didn't survive to speak it, and tried not to think about what would happen if Wade caught them before they reached Cheyenne. At 4 a.m, they left the boarding house through the back door. The coach waited in the alley, driver hunched against the cold. They climbed in, pulled the curtains, and rolled through Denver's empty streets toward the depot. They were 3 blocks from the station when the ambush came. 4 men on horseback blocking the street. In the lamplight, Clara recognized the lead rider, Wade Driscoll, looking older than she remembered. Harder. The months of hunting her had worn on him too. The coach jerked to a stop. Eli was already moving, pushing Clara down, reaching for the Colt at his hip. But before he could fire, the door opened and a man with a badge stepped in. Sheriff's deputy. Elijah Coltrane, the deputy said. You're under arrest for kidnapping. Step out of the coach with your hands visible. This is a setup, Eli said. Wade Driscoll's behind this. Don't care who's behind it, the deputy said. I got a warrant. Now move. They had no choice. Eli stepped out, hands raised. The deputy cuffed him, rough and efficient, then turned to Clara. Mrs. Doyle, your brother-in-law is here. He's been worried sick about you. Wade moved his horse forward, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. Clara, thank God you're safe. This man, he took you from your home, filled your head with lies. But you're safe now. I'll take care of everything. Clara's hand found the Colt at her hip, hidden under her coat. 4 rounds, not enough to kill all of them, but enough to kill Wade. She could do it. End this right here, but that would make her a murderer, would prove Wade's story, would destroy any chance of legal justice. She met Eli's eyes, saw him give the smallest shake of his head. Not like this, his expression said. We fight this with law, not bullets. Clara's hand fell away from the gun. You're all right, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll go with you, but not because I believe you, because I want everyone to hear the truth in open court. Wade's smile faltered slightly. Of course, that's all I want too. Truth. They arrested Eli, took him to the Denver jail. They put Clara in a hotel under guard, though Wade called it protection. And Josiah Brennan, watching from the shadows, rode hard for Cheyenne with copies of all the evidence, praying he could reach the governor before Wade consolidated his victory. Eli spent 3 days in a cell that smelled of piss and despair. They'd taken his weapons, his boots, everything that might be used to escape. The other prisoners gave him space, sensing something in him that warned against casual violence. He used the time to think, to plan, to calculate odds. On the 2nd day, a man visited. Not Josiah, not Clara, a stranger in a fine suit with eyes that had seen things. Mr. Coltrane, the man said, my name is Nathaniel Hewitt. I'm a doctor from Leadville. I was a friend of Jack Doyle's. I know who you are, Eli said. Clara mentioned you. Good, Hewitt said. Then you'll want to know that Henry Cooper survived, crawled back to Leadville 4 days after you left him. He's been telling everyone who'll listen about what Wade tried to do. Half the town doesn't believe him, but the other half does. That's why I'm here. Then you know I'm on your side, Eli said. I am, Hewitt continued. I'm here because Josiah Brennan succeeded. He got your case moved to territorial court. Governor Hoyt has agreed to hear testimony. The trial starts tomorrow in Cheyenne. Tomorrow, Eli said. How am I supposed to get there from jail? Hewitt smiled. Through corruption, ironically. I've bribed the night guard. $200. Tonight, at midnight, he'll unlock your cell. There'll be a horse waiting in the alley behind the jail. You ride north, hard. You can make Cheyenne by dawn if you don't stop. Why are you doing this? Because Jack Doyle was my friend, Hewitt said, and because Wade Driscoll killed him, and because the law should mean something, even out here where civilization is just a word we use to feel better about ourselves. And what about Clara? She'll be brought to Cheyenne under guard. Wade thinks he's won, so he's confident. He'll let her testify, thinking Morrison can control the narrative. He doesn't know Morrison has no power in front of the governor. That night, exactly as promised, the cell door clicked open. Eli slipped out into darkness, found the horse, and rode. He pushed the animal hard, maybe too hard, but there was no choice. By the time the sun rose, he was in Cheyenne, exhausted and filthy but free. The territorial courthouse was a solid brick building on Capitol Avenue. Already people were gathering. News of the trial had spread. Rich heiress versus dangerous mountain man grieving brother-in-law trying to protect family. The kind of story newspapers loved. Eli found Josiah outside, pacing. "You made it," Josiah said. "Good. The hearing starts in an hour. I've got witnesses lined up. Dr. Hewitt is testifying. The Fletchers came, can you believe it? Farmers who have nothing, but they traveled 2 days because they believe in Clara." "Will it be enough?" Eli asked. "I don't know," Josiah admitted. "Governor Hoyt is fair, but he's also political. If he rules against Wade, half the mining companies in Colorado will scream. But if he rules for Wade, he's saying wealthy men can torture women without consequence. It's a hell of a position to be in." Clara arrived in a closed carriage, Wade beside her, 2 deputies escort. She looked composed, dressed in a proper gown someone had provided, her hair arranged neat. But Eli saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her skirts. She was terrified and determined, a dangerous combination. Their eyes met across the street. She nodded once. He nodded back. No words needed. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Governor Hoyt sat at the bench, a stern man in his 50s with gray whiskers and eyes that missed nothing. Beside him sat 2 advisors and a court recorder. "This hearing will come to order," Hoyt said. "We're here to consider the petition of Mrs. Clara Doyle regarding allegations of attempted murder, embezzlement, and unlawful detention. Mrs. Doyle, you may present your case." Clara stood, walked to the front, faced the governor and the crowd and Wade Driscoll, who sat smirking in the front row. And she told her story. She told it without tears, without drama. Just facts. Jack's death, Wade's pressure, the torture on the tree, Eli's rescue, the evidence Tom Grady had died protecting. She spoke for 20 minutes, her voice never wavering, even when she described the rope cutting into her flesh. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Wade's lawyer, a slick man from Denver named Hackett, stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Doyle, is it true you've been living in the wilderness with Mr. Coltrane for the past 2 weeks?" "Yes," Clara said. "Alone, unchaperoned, in intimate circumstances." "I was recovering from torture," Clara said coldly. "Eli Coltrane saved my life, repeatedly. If you're trying to suggest something inappropriate happened, you're a fool." "The court will determine what's appropriate," Hackett said. "I suggest, Mrs. Doyle, that your judgment has been compromised, that you formed an unhealthy attachment to your rescuer, that your accusations against Driscoll are the product of confusion and manipulation." "I suggest," Clara said, "that you're being paid to lie. How much is Wade giving you, Mr. Hackett? Enough to ignore murder?" The courtroom erupted. Hoyt banged his gavel. "Order, this is a court of law, not a saloon." Eli was called next. He testified about finding Clara, about the rope marks, about being pursued by Wade's hired guns, about Tom Grady's confession and death. Hackett tried to paint him as a violent drifter with no credibility, but Eli's calm recitation of facts was harder to dismiss than emotion would have been. Then Dr. Hewitt testified, then the Fletchers. Then Josiah presented the documentary evidence. Letters, ledgers, bank statements, all pointing to Wade's guilt. By afternoon, the case was overwhelming. Even Hackett seemed to know it. Wade's smirk had vanished, replaced by something harder, more desperate. Governor Hoyt called a recess to consider the evidence. The crowd filed out, buzzing with speculation. Clara stood on the courthouse steps, breathing free air, maybe believing for the first time that she might actually win. That's when Wade made his move. He came up behind her, quick and quiet. His hand locked on her arm, a knife pressed against her ribs. "Walk," he whispered. "Don't scream. Don't fight. Or I'll kill you right here and claim self-defense." Clara's blood went cold. She looked around desperately, saw Eli across the street, saw him notice, saw him start moving. But too far, too slow. Wade pulled her into an alley. The knife dug deeper. Sign the papers, he hissed. Right now. Sign the mine over to me, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and you die here. You'll hang anyway, Clara said. The evidence is presented. The governor's seen it all. I'll run, Wade said. Mexico, California, somewhere far away with your money. But at least I'll be alive, which is more than you'll be if you don't sign. He'd prepared papers, Clara realized. Even now, even with everything falling apart, he'd planned for this. Had the deed ready, just needed her signature, and she'd be dead before anyone found her body. No, Clara said. Wade's eyes widened. What? No, Clara repeated. I'd rather die than give you what you want. I'd rather bleed out in this alley than let you win. So do it. Kill me. But know that you'll hang for it. Wade's hand shook. The knife wavered. For a moment, Clara thought she'd miscalculated, thought he'd actually do it. Then Eli's voice cut through the tension. Step away from her. Wade spun, pulling Clara with him, using her as a shield. Eli stood at the mouth of the alley, a borrowed pistol in his hand, aimed steady despite his wounded shoulder. You don't want to do this, Driscoll, Eli said. You kill her, I kill you. Then it's all over. You won't shoot, Wade said. You might hit her. I won't miss, Eli said flatly. I never miss. They stood frozen, three people balanced on the edge of violence. Then Clara did something Wade didn't expect. She grabbed his knife hand with both of hers and pulled it away from her ribs. Twisted hard. The knife clattered to the ground. Eli was on Wade in 2 strides, pistol whipping him across the face. Wade went down hard, bleeding, and Eli kicked the knife away, kept the gun trained. It's over, Eli said. You're done. Deputies came running, drawn by the commotion. They found Wade Driscoll on the ground, Clara Doyle standing over him, and Elijah Coltrane with a gun he lowered only when ordered. An hour later, Governor Hoyt reconvened court. He didn't take long to deliver his ruling. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, he said, I find that Wade Driscoll did willfully and deliberately attempt to murder Clara Doyle, that he embezzled funds from the Silver Vein mine, that he murdered Jack Doyle and Jacob Grady, that he conspired with Judge Morrison to obstruct justice, that he is guilty on all counts. He paused, letting that sink in. Wade Driscoll, you are sentenced to death by hanging, sentenced to be carried out 30 days hence. Judge Morrison, you're removed from office and will face separate charges. Mrs. Doyle, the mine is yours, free and clear. This court is adjourned. The courtroom exploded in noise. Clara stood still, not celebrating, just breathing. It was over. Actually over. Outside, as the sun set over the prairie, Eli found her sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. You did it, he said. We did it, Clara corrected. I wouldn't have survived without you. Eli sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. What will you do now? I don't know, Clara admitted. Go back to Leadville, I suppose. Run the mine, try to build something good from all this mess. That's a good plan, Eli said. They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara asked, what about you? Back to your mountain? Maybe, Eli said. Haven't decided yet. It's a lonely life, Clara said. It was, Eli agreed. But I'm starting to think loneliness is a choice, not a sentence, Mom. Clara looked at him, really looked. Saw the man behind the beard and scars. The man who'd saved her not because he had to, but because he chose to. The man who'd taught her that surviving meant more than just staying alive. If you ever want company, she said carefully, on that mountain or anywhere else, you should know that I'm good at surviving now. You taught me that. Eli met her eyes. Something passed between them, fragile and new but real. I'll keep that in mind, he said. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky red and gold. Somewhere in those mountains, winter was coming. Somewhere, snow was already falling on high peaks. But for now, in this moment, Clara Doyle and Elijah Coltrane sat together in the gathering dusk. 2 survivors finding their way towards something that might, if they were patient and brave, turn into a life worth living. 6 months later, Clara sold the mine for a fair price and used the money to establish a shelter for women escaping violence. The Doyle House, she called it in Jack's memory. It stood on the edge of Leadville, doors always open, questions never asked. In its first year, it helped 40 women find safety and new starts. Judge Morrison fled to California before federal charges could be filed. Some said Wade had paid him enough to disappear comfortably. Sheriff Dawson resigned quietly a month after the trial, replaced by a younger man with fewer debts and cleaner hands. The change came slow, but it came. Eli stayed in Denver through the winter, officially as Clara's security, unofficially as her friend. They moved slow, careful, two damaged people learning to trust again. By spring, when the high country opened up, they went to the mountains together. Not to hide, to live. They built a larger cabin near where Eli's old one stood, big enough for two, with windows that let in light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the world turn. They never married formally, didn't see the need, but they built a life together piece by piece, day by day. Sometimes Clara would have nightmares about the rope. Eli would wake with her, hold her without words until the shaking stopped. Sometimes Eli would get lost in memories of Rebecca and Emma. Clara would sit with him, present and patient, until he came back to himself. They healed slowly the way deep wounds heal, with time and care and the steady accumulation of good days outnumbering bad ones. 3 years after the trial, they rode down to the Fletcher farm to visit Martha and John, brought gifts, told stories, played with Sarah and Michael, who barely remembered the wild woman who'd stumbled out of the forest. It was Martha who asked the question everyone was thinking. "Are you happy?" she said to Clara when the men were off looking at the new barn. Clara thought about it, looked out toward the mountains where Eli was pointing at something, probably tracking an animal by its sign, looked at the life they'd built, unlikely and imperfect, but theirs. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." "Good," Martha said. "Jacob would be glad to hear it. That helping you wasn't for nothing." "It wasn't," Clara said. "Tell Tom the same. Wherever his spirit is. He died getting me the evidence that saved my life." They rode back to the mountains as autumn settled in, the aspen turning gold, the air sharp with promise. That night, sitting by their fire, Clara asked Eli the question she'd been holding for months. "Do you ever regret it? Saving me? Getting pulled into my mess?" Eli was quiet, watching the flames. Then, "Every day I regret not finding you sooner. Not stopping Wade before he hurt you. But saving you? Never. Not once." "Why, man?" Claire asked. "Because you reminded me what living means," Eli said. "Not just surviving, living, fighting for something, standing up when it's easier to stay down. You taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway." Clara moved closer, took his hand, scarred and rough, but steady. "We taught each other," she said. And they had. In the mountains where rope and pain had nearly broken her, Clara Doyle found strength. In the woman he saved, Elijah Coltrane found purpose. Together they found something neither thought possible. A second chance. A future. A life built not on forgetting the past, but on refusing to let it define everything that came after. The fire burned down to embers. The stars came out, impossibly bright in the thin mountain air. And two people who'd survived the worst the world could throw at them sat together in the darkness, not afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because they'd faced worse, and they'd survived. Together. That was enough. That was everything. And in a cabin 46 years later, an old man named Elijah Coltrane would finish telling this story to his grandson Daniel, handing the boy a small silver locket that had belonged to Clara. "Real courage," he'd say, "is standing up when the world tells you to stay down. Remember that, boy. And when your time comes, don't run from it. Face it like she did." Daniel would nod, not fully understanding yet, but holding the locket like it was made of gold. Someday he would.